Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining today's webinar. The focus of today's webinar is talking about CAPM certification predominantly, and also provide introduction to project management and explain why CAPM is a gateway to becoming a professional project manager. Throughout the presentation, the webinar today, what I have done is put everybody on mute just to keep the noise level down. But you can use the chat to ask any questions. In case there are questions that I may not be able to get to, what we can do, of course, is you can email us later after the presentation, and we'll make sure all the questions are properly addressed. Okay. With that said, I'm now going to start. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and here's a quick bio about me. I don't usually read from every single slide, but a couple of highlights. I am a working professional. I'm the CEO of PMI Advisory. I'm also a professor at Montclair State University, as well as other universities such as China European International Business School. I have a lot of project management experience. I led, for example, global project services for one of the Big Four and managed quite a bit of different projects. I'm an active volunteer with various global organizations, including PMI Global, as well as International Standard Organization. So what I hope to provide is my perspective on the state of project management, as well as how professionals can get started in this field, starting with the CAPM certification, which I view really as a gateway to starting your career in project management. So the agenda today is very quickly about project and project management. We'll talk about the job growth in project management, getting started in project management itself, a couple key words about Project Management Institute, and then spend the rest of the time on the Certified Associate in Project Management. I do see that, Eliza, thank you. You can't hear anything. My apologies. There could be different settings. For people who cannot have problems hearing, you could also dial into it. So on your screen, you'll see that there is a box, I think the second icon, that shows you how to dial into the call as well. So hopefully through either your computer voice over IP or through the dial-up, you can hear the rest of audio. Now, in case you really couldn't, this is being recorded and we'll send the link to everybody. So let's talk about project management. Very quickly, for those of you who probably here, you probably have heard of project management. So projects, by PMI definition, is really the temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service. And I would add that these services or results or products that you create tend to be value add to the sponsoring organization. And if you think about that broad definition, then a lot of things we do in companies, as well as in society, even in personal life, fits this particular definition of what really constitutes project. It could go from planning a wedding, planning an event, to a home renovation. These are home-type personal projects, to something, of course, significantly larger. Project management is the application of that knowledge, the skills, the tools, and techniques to the project activities to meet the project requirement. An organization apply project management because they want to do things faster, better, more secure with more consistency. Project manager is the person responsible, assigned by the organization to lead the team that is responsible for achieving the project results. So project management, and project manager is clearly defined here. There are many examples of projects. If you look all around you, for example, constructing a factory for automotive part production, merging two companies into one, M&A activities, those are very common projects. Designing a collection for fashion for the fall season, organizing conferences, developing interface in IT systems, and there are many, many other examples. The environment of the project can be quite intense. And typically, the intensity of the project environment in your organization is really related or highly correlated with the amount of change. And the more change-oriented the industry tend to be, the more likely that there are going to be projects needed to cope with this amount of change. So let me pause here slightly to respond to Eliza. And for those who have problem again dialing in, you could use the little phone icon, which is one of the icons that shows up, and you could dial in by phone to get the audio. Okay. So what we see in the industry is in fast-moving industries such as technology, for example, there tend to be more project-oriented work. This is mainly because to keep up with competition, companies like Apple, Samsung have to compete with each other. And to deliver new products and services to the market, project is a dominant mechanism. Other project environment that can be fairly intense you see could be construction industry. Almost every construction, they use the word construction project, is because it is a project-oriented endeavor. Other organization in a fairly slow-moving organization or industry, for example, education, healthcare for a long time has been relatively slow-moving. There weren't that many projects. Of course, today, a lot has changed. Healthcare, for example, is experiencing a lot of turbulence, and now there are far more greater projects. So the project intensity has really intensified. The government is also getting involved in the project management sector. So here I want to just give you a couple of examples of what we see in the United States, United Kingdom, and China. United States, for example, many of us probably remember when Obama healthcare website failed in around 2013 timeframe in October, right? So the government understands that they need to do project better. And about 2 years ago, they passed a law, Act of Congress, called Program Management Improvement Accountability Act, PMI. And this was signed into law in December 2016. And it really requests the Deputy Director for the Management Office and Budget to start applying project management to all the government endeavors. So it impacts all the government area except Department of Defense, which has its own project management methodology. It developed a 5-year program project management plan. And it also requested designing a job and a career path for project and program manager in federal government. So the government now is in the act as well. Take United Kingdom. United Kingdom actually has been the forefront of project management for many years. The Prince 2, for those of you who have a European background, you probably have heard of that. That is quite popular still in Europe today. That was launched in 1989 and is prompted by one of the government's offices. So UK has a very lively project environment in the government sector. China, most recently in June of this year, I was invited by the CIFA, which is the State Administration of Foreign Export Affairs, to speak about project management in 3 Chinese cities. And here you can see a little bit of me standing right there. And by the way, in this presentation, about 400 people attended an audience and about another 600 people dialed in. So that gives you a sense of the popularity of project management in China. In China in particular, the CIFA is working with PMI to deliver, for example, the PMP test. And from essentially almost a zero base just 20 years ago, today about 1 in 5 PMPs are actually from China. And collectively, if you combine the PMP between China and the United States combined, it almost represents 60% of all the PMPs in the world. So that gives you sort of a sense of the popularity. Next, let's look at the growth of the industry. The organization today understands the value of project management because so much of what they do can be managed using project management, whether it is strategic initiative, change, or innovation. The demand for professional growth whether to have the domain expertise, the motivation, the guiding skills, the strategic and the business skills. These demands are strong. And leading sectors in project management that we see that applies a lot of project management: manufacturing, construction, information services, publishing, financials and insurance, management and professional services, utilities, oil and gas. So as you can see, especially in the utility, oil and gas, as well as construction, these are very capital-intensive industries. Organizations cannot afford to do them wrong. It's too expensive. It's too costly. The failure is just not acceptable. And hence, project management is a very dominant set of skills in those industries. If you look at trends in the job growth, and this is just an example, more than 200,000 new jobs yearly in project management. Project management wages are premium at 82% over non-project management occupation. And I'll show you a detailed chart on that too. PMP, now I know we're not talking about PMP here, but PMP is considered the gold standard, and CAPM, of course, for people who's interested in CAPM, you should work toward the PMP. Depending on where you are in the world, in the United States, the latest salary survey actually shows there's a 25% premium. So around the global average hovers around 2 to 20%. Very, very high premium for having that certification. And next, let's look at just this, where we talk about the 82% between project management industry and the project industries or occupation that doesn't use a lot of project management. So this gives you a longitudinal view over a 13-year period in which the blue line represents project management-oriented occupation versus non-project management-oriented occupation. And you could see in this study done by PMI in 2017, it clearly showed a very, very high premium for those who's working in project-oriented occupation. Now, if you sit back and think about this, this of course makes a lot of sense because project management is challenging. It is not for everybody. And the value you contribute to the organization that's undertaking it, say Apple, using project management to create the latest iPhone. Of course, the hope is the iPhone will sell and make a lot of money, and that money, of course, ultimately gets to the people who's doing the work, including the project managers. So that's another reason for that. So how do you get started in project management? There are many, many different options. Here are just a sample of 12 different options. For those of you who's in school, who are close to graduation, you could join project at school and job, observe how project managers work. Learn by yourself or take a class. There's a lot of great resources out on the internet. If you just type project management training, for example, or go to Groupon. Groupon will sell you a project management preparation course for $9, I think, the latest I saw. Get involved within your company's PMO. PMO stands for Project Management Office, which is more of a centralized body that has a lot of project managers in it. So if your organization have a PMO, chances are it has a fairly mature project management. So there, definitely look at what PMO has to offer. Create your own project. A lot of kids today, I teach in colleges, a lot of the students I know, they run their own blog sites or websites or their own company, share events, join startup or small company. You can also volunteer. Now, I think volunteer is a great way to experiment. The last I checked, almost nobody ever gets fired for volunteering, which means that if you are working near a church or school or NGO, try to give yourself a bigger role, more accountability. Test your management capability, project management skills. Again, like I said, very few people I ever know got fired from doing a poor job at volunteering. So it's a great way to extend yourself. Look for mentors at school. Participate in conferences. PMI runs quite a number of conferences. For example, in October, there is the Global Congress, and this is one of the largest gathering of project professionals. Last year, I spoke at the China Conference, China Symposium in Shanghai in September, and about 2,000 people attended. Others attend webinar training. This is a good example. This will give you a strong flavor of project management. For those who have PMP, it could be even a refresher to look at what are the career paths and also earn PDU. Speak with your professor or trainers. Actively learn about that. Join forums and become a member of PMI, which is a wonderful organization, one of the largest in the world, dedicated to project management profession. So let's look at PMI. PMI is located actually not very far from where I'm calling in. I'm calling from northern Jersey. They're located right across the border in Pennsylvania. They were first found in about 1969. There are chapters in about 880 countries, and there are about almost, give or take, around 300 chapters or potential chapters around the world. So in New Jersey, for example, it is one big chapter, but in New York State, there's a chapter for New York City, Long Island, I believe, Westchester, and that's before going northwards into Buffalo and Syracuse. It is a nonprofit organization, and they have many different standards, certifications, 8 of them actually, and later we'll talk about research, program, volunteering. So it's a great professional organization that can really help you both launching a career, propelling yourself, continue to grow in that career, and help you to achieve your maximum. And very quickly about PMO Advisory. I'm the CEO of PMO Advisory, and we are a PMI registered education provider, number 4172. We're one of the first to offer portfolio management professional training, and we're one of the few training companies that offers courses in nearly all of the PMI certifications. So that's what makes us stand out. And of course, today is largely about CAPM. A lot of the students, over the years, I have worked with many different organizations. So for example, with Montclair State University, a lot of our graduate students taking the graduate project management course, as a part of the course, gets membership to PMI. For other students, undergraduate, PMI has a drastically reduced membership fee for for full-time students. So the benefit of the membership are quite many. They get the free PMBOK book, for example, as well as the other standards. On the projectmanagement.com, you have access to so many different templates and tools, articles, and latest thoughts. There's a huge community. There's approximately, I think, almost slightly north of 500,000 members, so this is slightly outdated. Receive trends and best practices via newsletter. Student membership, as I mentioned, for full-time student is about 4 times less than the normal membership fee at $32 a year. And, of course, you could participate in local chapters. Over years, I've connected many of my students at Montclair, for example, with the New Jersey chapter or the New York, and when I taught in Shanghai, try to connect them with the PMI China. Very quickly look at the certifications. PMI has 8 certifications currently. The biggest one, and the one that essentially subsumes everything else, is the PMP. And when we before talk about the salary premium, we're really referring to the PMP. It is seen and viewed largely as the gold standard in project management profession. And as you can see, the number is approaching 900,000. So likely before the end of the year, if not shortly after the year, this number will be about 900,000. The other certifications that are quite prominent in the PMI world includes the ACP. This is probably the fastest growing certification in the PMI world. You have the portfolio management, one of the newest, and hence the number reflects that. There's only 614 of us in the world. Program management, about 2,500. Risk management, around 5,000. Schedule, 1,900. PBA, which is slightly different career track. These are people who really into the analysis side, finding out the requirements for a business. So not quite project management, but definitely a very important role in project. And there are about 3,000 PBAs. This is also a very new certification. And then finally, there's the CAPM, which is really our focus today. CAPM itself is growing steadily. There's about 36,700 of certified people. It is seen as really a stepping stone toward the rest of the other certifications. So a very logical next move for people with CAPM is PMP, perhaps ACP. and possibly PBA as well. So today we're going to mostly focus on the CAPM. Now, I also want to show conceptually where does it fit. We have a different workshop on a project management career, so I took a slide from there. But generally, for a lot of professionals, this presents an idealized career ladder. And when I say idealized, it's not necessarily everybody go through this in the exact same steps. Most people's career aren't also always in lockstep. Sometimes we have hurdles in life, and we may, for example, be let go from work. So it's not necessarily always linear. A lot of project managers also come from different industries and different experiences. So this number, again, or this picture, can be slightly misleading. But if you were to continue your career, build your skills, build your accountabilities, your credibility in the field, this is a fairly common career ladder. You start out, for example, as a project assistant, maybe an analyst. You could be a team member, a coordinator. And assuming you do your role pretty well, at some point, it's likely your manager will say, Tate, you have done that analysis pretty well. How about leading this small project? And then you start embarking on to become a junior project manager. From junior project manager, if you do well, just as I have done earlier in my career, my boss gave me bigger and bigger project. Next thing you know, I become a full-fledged project manager when I was at Accenture, and slowly working toward a larger and more complex project, became program manager. And from there, eventually I led the global project services for one of the big four. So fairly idealized, but it is not uncommon. Now, the thing I want to highlight about CAPM is it is a gateway, because CAPM is the only certification in the PMI world that you are not required to have deep experiences. You do need to have enough education, and you do need to have some educational hours, but you don't have to have true experience. So what CAPM gives you is a great certification to indicate to your employer of your seriousness, and then, of course, it propels you on the road to this career path. Okay. I see a couple people taking a pause here seem to have problem with the audio. Again, if you have audio, please try the phone. So let me type this note quickly. So now let's dive into the Certified Associate in Project Management, CAPM. The CAPM certification is a 3-hour test, ultimately, of 150 questions. And there are really two dominant ways of taking the test, and later we'll explain. But at the Pearson VUE Testing Center, as well as online proctor exam. There's also a paper-based option that's not very common that you could take at Prometrics as well. The prerequisite to this certification is having a secondary degree, so high school degree, plus 1,500 hours of work experience. Or, if you don't have that, you could also substitute the work experience with about 23 hours of project management education. And that education should really come from either a school and university or a PMI registered education provider. Now, one of the advice I have for a lot of my students, both at Montclair as well as other schools, is that most of our project management courses are designed to have around that at the minimum 23 hours. So for the most part, if you went to one of our courses, chances are you already fulfilled the educational requirements. Okay. I see the note saying that the sound goes on and off. Just a quick check. Are other people having this problem? I'll continue because it is being recorded. Again, I'll make sure everybody have the recording. So what are some of the benefits for having the CAPM? I briefly talked about, giving your hiring manager the indication of your seriousness of project management. That clearly is going to be one of the leading indicators. But there are other benefits. So aside from the competitive advantage of finding jobs, it boosts your confidence because CAPM really indicates to the potential to your boss or manager or potential company of your basic knowledge in project management. CAPM, later we'll talk about, is based on the latest project management body of knowledge 6.0. And by passing the test, it demonstrates to your manager that you really quite know your content skills pretty well. Now, you may still have some difficulty in terms of applying that because that comes with experience, but at least at the knowledge and concept level, you're there. You could use the knowledge and your current future project, increase the project success and your client satisfaction. A lot of my students, for example, are entrepreneurs. They, for example, some of them are in real estate, buying and selling houses, renovating them, etc. Having that skill set, I could only imagine, help you to manage a project that much better. It's a great start career as a skilled professional with that fundamental knowledge, and it really stands out in any job search. The other big benefit is by having the CAPM, you're actually almost halfway there in terms of the PMP, in terms of the preparation, which is really the target you want to go after. That is the gold standard. Because the PMP, in terms of the knowledge and the concept, is very similar to that of the CAPM. PMP requires a lot more experience, but that you'll gain experience, of course. So in terms of base knowledge, you have quite a bit already. From a certification process, just really, really high level, you submit your application, and typically once you start working on it, you have about 90 days. The PMI will take a quick look at making sure that the application itself is completed. If not, they'll let you know fairly soon, usually within 24 hours, if not a day or two. You may be audited, and later we'll talk about the audit process, but essentially for CAPM, you may ask you for your high school diploma or college diploma, and ask you for validation of this 23 hours of education. So in the case of a lot of my students, their transcript, for example, will serve that. You pay the fee, and later we'll talk about that, and then you now qualify for the exam. Generally speaking, you have 1 year from the date of the approval to finish the CAPM test, and then the CAPM certification is good for 5 years. Now, CAPM is a little bit special. All the other 7 PMI certification has recertification, so you can recertify and extend and renew your certification. CAPM expires after 5 years. If you want to maintain CAPM after 5 years, you basically have to take the test again. The idea, of course, is that the CAPM is a gateway to the rest of the project management. So in 5 years, if you're really pursuing this profession, you should then be qualified for the PMP. And hence, CAPM is no longer as important. So that's why CAPM itself expires after 5 years. The eligibility we talked about before, you only need to have a secondary degree, and you could either have 1,500 hours of experience or 23 contact hours of formal education. Again, at a university or at a registered education provider. Now, some years ago, just as a mini story, I was actually the director of outreach for the PMI New York City. And one of our endeavors was actually working with high school students and getting them ready for the CAPM. So that was an interesting endeavor, and in this case, project management reaching not only to the college graduates, but also to the high school. So clearly, you could see the vital importance of this profession, in this case for the New York City Board of Education. The fees for the tests are listed here. Generally speaking, it is worthwhile to be a member. And PMI does offer a bundle. You could go to pmi.org and find that out for the bundle between the membership and the CAPM test for full-time students. Now, if you are not a member, the cost is a little bit higher at $300. We'll talk a little bit about the CAPM test. I mentioned you have a year to pass the test. You could actually take the test up to 3 times, but the second and the third time costs $150 more for members. So those are some additional costs. The audit process, as I mentioned, very quickly, PMI do audit. They choose application at random. So it's hard to say the exact percentage of people. So you may get audited, and in this case, getting audited will be sending your diploma or the global equivalent, and getting the signature from your supervisor or manager if you have the 1,500 hours, or copies of the certification letter of registration, your transcripts, for example, indicating that you have taken a project management course. Now, one thing to note, what I'm providing information here is actually highlighted and captured very nicely in the CAPM handbook, which you could click here to download. It is at PMI.org, so I know you can't click exactly on this video, but if you go PMI.org and under certification, look for CAPM, and you'll see that the handbook can be downloaded. It is a 46-page document, so it's quite detailed, and what I'm providing here is just sort of a summary view of the most relevant points and the most popular points. But for the detail, definitely refer to that document. By the way, I see viewer 49 asked a question, can anyone please help me? What can be done? I am not sure what is the question, what can be done. So if you could elaborate, viewer 49, that would be great. In terms of the exam, so after you submit the application, PMI accepts your application, you have this year to complete the exam. In this year, you can take the exam pretty much any time, and again, up to 3 times should you fail the earlier times. The CAPM exam is 150 multiple choice questions, and of those 150 questions, 50 questions are actually pre-test questions. This is when PMI is trying new questions. They actually don't count. So they're looking for statistically sampling of how well people do on these questions, how effective these questions are. But of course, you don't know which 15 questions they are, so you have to treat them all equally. In total, there are 150 questions, and you have 3 hours to finish. So timing is quite important. You could do the math. 150 questions, 3 hours, 180 minutes. You have essentially roughly a little more than a minute per question. So it's a fairly fast-paced test. You do have 2 options. Generally speaking, there's a third option for paper-based that's not very popular. You could take the test online proctoring. So you could actually take it in your home, at school, in a quiet office. And if you do take the online test, it is worth to know that you're not allowed to have any paper or pencil. There is a camera that will look at your environment, so you really can't write down anything. So in this case, you only really have your mind to remember things. If you do go to a testing center for the computer-based, center-based testing, they do give you a reusable writing pad, so you could jot some notes. And that is actually important because you could then do some brainstorming. So you could do a data dump on the things that you were sort of afraid that you may forget throughout the test, and so that could be slightly helpful. In terms of the test itself, one of the most impressive documents, and I was actually on the task force to help to create the document to some extent and influence it, is the examination content outline. Now, I actually personally think this is one of the most important documents that PMI publishes. The reason being is the examination content outline clearly demonstrate what are the skills, what are the activities that project managers perform in their roles. So in this case, there are 13 essentially chapters, and you can see the breakdown of the questions pertaining to each chapter. So for example, about 6% of the questions are about sort of the general introduction to project management, the context of project management, the environment of project management in Chapter 2 is another 6%. The role of project manager, 7%. And then the 10 knowledge areas from integration through stakeholder, and the number varies. The focus, as you can see, is on, no surprising, communication, which is one of the most common reasons why projects struggle and sometimes fail. Procurement has the least number of questions. That's mainly because procurement itself in a supply chain management is actually quite independent field in itself. So there are fewer questions there. And you could download it here. Again, you could go to PMI certification. You'll find the ECO or the examination content outline. Oops, skipping one slide. Some suggestions for those. Okay, I think this is it. Some suggestions for people really looking at the preparation for the CAPM. And here I'm going to spend probably more time on this slide than any other slide to just give you sort of the details around strategizing as well as planning for the certification. And I think this is really where the meat part of the presentation is too. First of all, give yourself enough time. CAPM is not something you could do overnight. If you look at the latest PMBOK, for example, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, there's almost about 800 pages just focusing on the project side. And then PMI currently bundle it with the Agile guide that adds about another 150, 160 pages. And it's ideal that you actually read that as well because there could be questions on Agile project management even on the CAPM test. So dissecting and really understanding this book as well as all the project management that you probably have learned in a class takes time. And that's why my suggestion generally for people is having carve out a dedicated time every week, preferably almost every day, even if it's just 30 minutes, to put yourself to that study. So depending on your schedule, 2 months is probably fairly low, 6 months is the relative max. You also don't want to go too long because you sort of lose the discipline, and sometimes for at least people like me, I'm very forgetful, so I forget what I learned just a couple of weeks ago. Read the CAPM handbook. The handbook, as I mentioned, is 46 pages. We gave you a little bit snippets from the handbook, but there's actually a lot more. There's, of course, how to schedule, for example, exam at Pearson VUE, or how to manage the online proctoring. All those are important information for you to know. So definitely read the CAPM handbook. There talk about different eligibility requirements. There could be exceptional hardship clauses for those that may experience some of those issues. So I think that would be greatly helpful. As I mentioned, study the latest PMBOK. The latest edition is the 6th edition that came out in September of last year. And PMI typically refreshes the standard approximately once every 5 years. So we're at the beginning stage of the 6th edition. So you have some time. Sometimes when we are on the boundary of things and people getting close to one edition overtaken by another, sometimes I actually encourage a student to read the next edition. But in this case, you're clearly in the 6th edition territory. My suggestion is to actually read the guide 3 times. Yesterday, in my office, the first time you should really read it, in my opinion, is a very thorough scanning. Your goal is reading it to see what you don't understand or some area understand more. This gives you a map, a roadmap to your study plan, which also leads to the second reading. The second reading should be very thorough, especially in areas that you're weaker at. Now, remember, PMBOK is a reference guide. It's not a textbook. So, for example, take earned value. It doesn't contain all the details and explanation around earned value. That's when you have to go to find a textbook, or for students in my classes, you probably have a textbook that explains the earned value. So you get a lot more theory. That's the second read. As you prepare for your test and as you get closer, my suggestion is also do a third read. The third read should be closer to the exam day, but this is just rescanning, making sure re-solidify the knowledge you have. If there are any bigger gaps, it's too late to close them. So that's why I think it's three reading is the best. On the internet, you can find a lot of testing tips. Most people hovers around 2 times, but my suggestion again is the 3 times. You also can obtain quality training manuals or courses, especially those with large practice tests. And the reason I say that is PMBOK is not a book for people to read. It's not a fictional book. Right? It's not a book that you read that you get excited about. It doesn't really tell a story. It's all a statement of facts, concepts. A lot of them are prescriptive, meaning how to do certain things. So it's a great, wonderful resources, but frankly, unless you're really into it, it may put you to sleep. It also doesn't describe and explain things in detail. And this is where quality training materials or textbooks or courses can be extremely helpful. When you do study, make sure you pay a lot of attention to the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll know once you open the book. There are about 49 processes in the PMBOK, organized by 5 process groups in 10 knowledge areas. So if you can imagine sort of a 2x2 matrix, sorry, not 2x2, the X column being the 5 process groups and the Y being the 10 knowledge area, you create a matrix of these processes. And each of these processes are sort of applies the system thinking. What are the input to the process? What are the tools and techniques that project manager apply to convert and transform that input into valuable output? So hence the input, tools, techniques, and outputs. Those questions are typically quite common on the CAPM exam, and it's important that you know those well. Also, try to understand the concept instead of memorizing them. This is, again, why reading PMBOK itself is not particularly helpful at some point, because understanding the concepts requires examples, requires exercises, and this is where training and good textbook can help you. You may want to join or even initiate a PMP prep group. Those are groups that can help you and help you in terms of preparing and study with others. So for a lot of my students, you could form natural prep courses. Sometimes PMI New Jersey chapter, New York chapter, for example, has also preparation groups as well, generally for PMP, but feel free to join PMP. As I mentioned before, PMP exam and CAPM exam are actually quite similar. The PMP is far more advanced. There's a lot more skill-based, scenario-based question on them. But for people studying CAPM, those are great stories to listen to. So I don't think you're missing out on anything. It may be slightly more advanced and getting a little used to, but it is still highly, highly useful. Attend project management training workshop on reliable source. I sort of mentioned that because a lot of the training material you could purchase, but having a training course and workshop, of course, can then give you access to quality instructors, and then you can ask your question in real time. So that is even more effective. Schedule examining events. Depends on where you live in the country. Scheduling exams usually do require some advance notice. Typically 10 days out is probably safe. Especially there are usually many testing centers, especially in the Metro New York area. So you could find the one that's most, from a time and date perspective, most workable for you. But do definitely schedule them in advance. Simulate the exam at least several times and imagine yourself taking the exam. So it depends on how you plan to take the test. If it's an online proctor exam, for example, you need to have a quiet space, a very clean space. You're not allowed to have any books or papers around. So it may not necessarily be feasible for everybody. If you're in school, you could, of course, book a room to do that. But you want to practice that environment because some people may not like that silence. If you go to a testing center, then the testing center have other testers. You want to give yourself this experience of taking the 3-hour exam at least a couple times before you take the real test. So in that case, you could figure out what's your pace, what's the right cadence, and that gives you the ability to do better timing. And then, of course, get familiar with the exam venue. I know in Prometrics, which is now for paper-based, you're allowed to visit. I'm not quite sure about Pearson, but you probably can call them and ask if you could visit the test center in advance. I know in the Prometrics for the PMP test, you are actually allowed to do that. The last thing is give yourself a lot of rest the night before and work on relaxation calming techniques because you want to be at your peak performance when you take the test. You don't want to be distressed to be overwhelming, right? So those are some helpful hints. So those are some of the test tips. Couple of next steps for those of you who are still excited about the CAPM, which I hope you are. There are a couple of suggestions. One is here, as I listed this URL. This will take you to the main page on the PMI website for the CAPM exam. Here you can download the ECO, Examination Content Outline, or as well as the handbook. You can if you're not sure project management is the best career for you, and by the way, now's the time to ask that, you should explore more of that. And we have later a slide on a special offer that my company offers for people who want to explore the project management as a career. You also want to develop a strategy to obtain the CAPM certification, including a strategy to master the knowledge. Now, I know there are some Stevens students, for example, on this call, and there will be an upcoming announcement between a partnership between PMO Advisory and the Stevens Institute of Technology, in which the Stevens Institute have hired us to provide training. I think they're actually free to the students. For all others, PMO Advisory has developed a blended online course for the CAPM. So 2 things I did want to mention. One is a workshop that we run. It's very, very low cost generally, and it is a 3 to 4 hour workshop around planning a career in project management. This is actually based on a book that I've written for mainly my students, as I've been teaching project management now for probably close to 10 years, if not more. So I took a lot of the students' questions and I put into this book. For my students who may be on the call, you know that this book is available for free at the beginning of the semester, but people can definitely buy it, and you can see the price is very low. One thing I should mention, some years ago, about 2015, I delivered a fairly large presentation on this career at a PMI New Jersey symposium, and I recorded it. So again, these free video, you could take a look at that yourself. If you are interested, we also do run the workshop, as I mentioned, and the next one is on February 2nd, 2019. It's from 1 to 4 in the U.S. Eastern Time Zone. It may go a little bit beyond 4, depending on the question. That's why it's 3 to 4 hours. And for people who's here, you can get a special code. One thing I should mention that I don't actually have financial relationship with any of my students. So if you're still my students at that point, you actually don't qualify. So just email me how you want to attend, and we'll figure something out. But that's more due to conflict of interest. You could read more about this workshop at this link here. The other thing we have done is we have put together a blended online course that's a combination of e-learning and live virtual. So in this case, what happens is that we have a course designed for helping professionals as well as recent graduates to prepare for the CAPM test. The live virtual portion are multiple sessions of 2 to 3 hours each to give you really hands-on help. And then the e-learning content, there are over 20 hours of videos that you can see. It's also bundled with our exam simulator, so there are about over 2,400 questions, making it one of the larger, if not the largest, exam test bank out there. And you could see the different fees. Now, one thing I do want to mention is for a very limited time for people here, we do provide a $300 discount, so half price of the silver tier, essentially. And you can learn more about that at pmadvisory.com/CAPM. Okay, that's all we have for today. I think we are almost close to about 5-10 minutes to the hour. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Very quickly before we go to answer, as I promised, this workshop is about project management, and you do earn PDUs. Now, earning PDU means you have a PMP. So for those who have PMP who came to here for a refresher, you can claim the PDU, and you have the instruction here. Please use this claims code. For those of you who have no certification, this just doesn't apply. It doesn't mean anything for you. Okay. I am now open for questions. If you have questions, please use the chat to ask any questions. And by the way, you could email us at sir@pmadvisory.com, give us a call, or visit our website. So, are there any questions that we have? Okay, so I see one request. Will you upload the slides after? To be honest, I'm not sure, because there are some slides that have a little bit more proprietary information. What I can do as a registered education provider is upload the video. So the recording of this video will be uploaded to our website. And again, I'll email that to everybody. Okay. Other questions? I am going to unmute the line. If it's not noisy, people can ask verbal questions. If it is noisy, then I am going to unmute again. Okay, I see there's one other questions. Okay. Okay, hi everybody. If you want, you can ask your questions.
Sir, one question, please.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask where can we get the e-handbook for this? Because I was just referring to some online material. And,
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there is too much background noise. I couldn't really hear the question. If you can, either type your question here or send me an email at cert@pmoadvisory.com, and I'll respond to your question directly. Okay? So please use the chat to send me a question. It was just too noisy. I couldn't hear it between all the background noise. Can we get the e-handbook? If you're referring to the e-handbook as the PMIs, so let me show you where it is. The handbooks are quite downloadable. So if you go to PMI.org, go to certification, go to CAPM. Okay. So here you have everything that you need to know about CAPM. It talks about the online proctor exam, for example, the student bundle that I briefly mentioned. You can also see the test center locations, tips and resources. This is where the handbook is. You could click right here and it opens the handbook, for example. You could also open the ECO, Examination Content Outline. And there are also some sample questions to give you a flavor. So the other question, could the CAPM make you overqualified for entry level? I would say at entry level, I wouldn't really worry about that particular question. I think it's a wrong focus. I think at entry level, if you're willing to work at the entry level, CAPM really signifies your seriousness and your intent in project management. So I really wouldn't worry about the overqualification. At some point in your career, that may become an issue, but probably not at this point yet. So I think CAPM is just a great certification, and especially if you work in a PMO environment, then it gives you a global certification. So no, I would say probably not a concern at this level. So very good question. Anybody else? If there are no further questions, we are getting close to on top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining this session. Again, the session is being recorded, and I will make sure that people who sign up will receive the link to the video of this presentation once we upload it. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Hopefully you learned something very useful, and now go out and achieve the CAPM certification. So thank you, everybody.